This is Jack Moelmann, and today we're located at the Los Angeles Airport Marriott Hotel. It's July 4th, 2012, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because I always say the time because some of these are done at midnight and 1 o'clock in the morning. So there's no excuse for our guests today to be wide awake. And anyway, we're here as part of the 2012 annual ATOS convention. And we have a guy here, his name is Alan Miller, who leads many lives. One is as a technician, one is as an artist, performer, and probably most important, he's a charter member of the American Theater Organ Society, then ATOE, American Theater Organ Enthusiasts, and he'll probably tell you he's the youngest guy when ATOS started in 1955. So, Alan, welcome, and maybe we're going to learn something from you. How did you first get started in music as a not a career, but I mean, just where did you get started in it, and how?
Well, thank you, Jack, for the opportunity to sit and talk with you. I grew up in a musical family, and probably as far back as I can remember, I had a babysitter who had an orchestra. It was a gal, and so when my parents would go out and babysitter would come in, sometime after my parents left, her orchestra would come in and sit in the living room and rehearse. So
how big was this orchestra?
Oh, I think she had about 4 or 5 pieces. And I remember saxophones and things that I didn't know what they were. I just knew that some of them were shiny and they all sounded a little bit different. And my parents didn't know about this until a few years back, but I used to sneak out of bed and crawl down the stairs and just sit there on the bottom step and watch them play and listen. And somewhere around 6th grade, my parents began to notice my interest in music and keeping time with music I heard. And they had, my dad played the accordion, my mother played the piano. She also played the organ, but then I didn't know that. And they had quite a collection of first 78s, and of course as hi-fi came along, all of the organ records they could get their hands on. So I grew up listening to Virgil Fox and Ethel Smith. So they noticed that I was taking quite an interest in the music when it was playing, and also the big bands back in the 40s. And when I was in 6th grade, I think my mother decided that I should take piano lessons. I took piano lessons with what was a theater organist, at this point a church organist, and his name was A. Stanley Usher. He kind of poo-pooed the theater organ, as it was popular at that time with the AGO people, but he talked a lot about it a lot, and that interested me. I squeaked through 4 years of piano lessons, fooling my teacher by getting him to play the piece at the end of the next piece I was to learn. I got him to play it at the end of my lesson. And rather than reading the music, I would then take what I heard him play and start working on it. And it was in my 4th year, when the classical music started to get a little more difficult, that he began to suspect something was wrong. And then he figured out that I really wasn't reading music, I was picking it up by ear. And he wondered why I was practicing my mistakes. Well, that's what happens when you play by ear. I did learn to some extent how to read music, and have more since gotten better at that. But most of what I play is done by ear, by listening and that sort of thing. Of course, as hi-fi came along, the first real good recordings of music. And I can remember, we talk about the wow moments, the moments that change your life. And for me there were several, but one of them was waking up one night around midnight. My dad had gotten a recording of G. Donald Harrison describing various voices of the pipe organ. This was an Aeolian Skinner recording in the mid-50s, and one of the stops that was demonstrated was the great trumpet at the Church of St. John the Divine in New York City. That's on very high pressure, 50 inches of wind, and extremely loud. And I was in bedroom upstairs and it woke me up when they played it. That was almost like a shock, and I immediately went downstairs to hear what they were listening to. That was very interesting. The next thing that came along was, here again, my piano teacher saying, "You got to listen to this," and he brought a recording of Reginald Fort at the Richmond Mosque, and that was something of great interest because now I was hearing popular or more popular pop music, classic music, played on the organ, and that really interested me. So I would start asking, well, how is he doing that? I'm hearing more than two things or three things being played at the same time. So at a very early age, a second touch was described to me, and boy, that was amazing that you could maybe play two different things on one keyboard, or two different sounds on one keyboard at the same time. So I became quite interested when the first George Wright recordings came out. That was another wow moment. Wow moment was my parents deciding to take me to New York City, and this was still pretty early, and we went to Radio City Music Hall. And of course the sound of that organ in that room was overwhelming. That grabbed me, and from that point the theater organ became a great interest to me. In 1956, I believe it was, the AGO convention was held in New York City, and George Wright, who I had become very fond of his records, the couple that he had recorded by then, was going to play what they called Milkman's Matinee at midnight at the New York Paramount. Well, I was really, 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 really excited about that, and my mother belonged to the American Guild of Organists. By then she was actually playing at a church, and I became extremely interested. We had also by then an electric Wurlitzer in our home. Mom played it, Dad played it a little bit. I was still playing on the piano, mainly picking out popular tunes of the day that I could play for my friends at school. That was something that kind of changed for me, because now I could play on the piano and the other kids were interested in what I was doing. When I was playing The Little Red Hen or some classical piece, the kids at school really didn't want to know about it. So this was a new thing for me to be able to play the latest tune on the piano, and the other kids would kind of gather around it at school. So here we are going to go to the AGO convention in New York City. One thing I remember about it was ungodly hot. It was again in the middle of the summer, and I had been told ahead of time, well, don't get too excited because George Wright isn't going to show up. And I said, well, what do you mean? So well, he never shows up for any of these things. He always has something happen to him at the last minute and bows out. Well, lo and behold, just before the convention, George Wright had an accident in his Thunderbird and broke an arm or a leg or something, and couldn't come to the convention. So Instead, they had Ray Bohr play, and Ray Bohr had just recorded the big sound on the Paramount organ, and I was with my parents right down in front. Never had seen a console come up out of the orchestra pit or come up out of the bottom of the theater, and was standing right there when the console came up, and that was a really exciting moment. And I remember most of that evening with the AGO, Virgil Fox playing on the Paramount organ after Ray Bohr played, and even Pierre Cochereau, who was a French organist who played an improvisation on all of the traps and effects, which was quite interesting. That was a change in my life, and one of the pieces that Ray Bohr played that night was Hernando's Hideaway. Well, it was just becoming popular at the time, you know, from I think the musical Pajama Game.
Mm-hmm.
And I went home and immediately started to work on it on my parents' Wurlitzer. And when the record finally came out, I was flabbergasted to find that I had the Ray Bohr arrangement down, having heard it once, almost note for note, exactly what he had played. A few things I had wrong I changed, and I played that arrangement for years.
Well, it sounds like you've had an exciting beginning, and I didn't even want to interrupt. It's somewhere along the line now, you got into the technical side of this thing, because you know, a theater organ, a church organ, a pipe organ is complicated. How did you, or how and when did you get into the technical side of this thing? And well, let's just start with that.
Well, I guess it was because I wanted to play, and really, there were no organs. There were no organs around. Most of this came about, I'm going to say, in my junior year in high school. Two things happened simultaneously. I had to write term paper for my English class, and the subject I chose was theater organs in Connecticut. I figured that using that as an excuse, I could do research on what organs had been in theaters in Connecticut, where they had been, what happened to them. Really, what I discovered was that there were very few left, but I did find what was there, crawled through a lot of theaters, taking pictures, and put this book together. Meanwhile, also doing interviews with some of the ATOS people that I had come to know. But by then I had heard of this. Actually, I was involved in ATOS before it was started, and that was with a round-robin letter called the Canura. And that was started by Alden Miller, another Al Miller at the time. There were people who got us confused, but they shouldn't have. It was through that Canura that the ATOE was started in the home of Dick Simonton. And I wanted to go to that, but my parents said, no, you're nuts, we're not going to let you fly across the country. I was 14 years old, and I think I made lots of noises about it, and they finally let me join, which was about the second or third month that ATOE was in existence. And so I began writing these people, whatever names I saw. If I had an address as a young kid, I would do that. Meanwhile, still my interest was in playing. The problem was I didn't have a theater organ to play on, and the only instrument that I found that was close, I found a two-manual Wurlitzer that still played in Waterbury, Connecticut, and went down there. At that point in time, Waterbury's only 45 minutes from where I live now, 45-minute drive, but then it was half a day. And we would go down early on a Sunday morning, and I would have a chance to play little two-manual Wurlitzer. I found a 3-manual, 12-rank Austin theater organ that had been written up in Reginald Whitworth's book, The Cinema Organ, published in England, and it gave the specification on this Austin theater organ in Hartford, Connecticut. So I said, well, I got to go find it. It was still there. Mainly, it was kind of impossible to remove it. That's why it was still there. It was not playable, but the Austin company was in Hartford, so I was able to go there and get parts and advice, and I would go to the theater and work on the organ. Finally got it to play. And now I had not the greatest theater organ in the world, but it was an instrument. I could go in the theater and it made some of the right sounds, and I could go in and play it. But in order to be able to play it, I had to work on it. I had to fix it. Well, I had mechanical interest. I've always had mechanical interest. I used to, as a child, my parents said that I was a difficult child because every time they gave me a toy, that the first thing I would do is take it apart.
Mm-hmm. I know
well,
that well.
Well, that's not unusual. The thing that they thought was unusual is after I took it apart, I looked at all of the pieces, and then I would put it back together and try to see if I could make it better than what it was before. And my dad tells me that every time I put one of my toys back together, it always worked.
And you didn't have any leftover parts?
And I didn't have leftover. Sometimes I added parts.
Mm.
So I went through my young years fixing people's toasters and all that sort of thing, which just honed my ability to look at a problem, whether it be mechanical or electrical, and try to find a solution.
As far as this is concerned, in the theater organ world, there aren't too many technicians that really know what they're doing. How many do you think we have today? Technicians that are in your category of professional?
Well, we can count them certainly on 2 hands. I would say probably somewhere between 8 and 10, really.
Yeah. And then I've heard, we have the amateur technicians that try to fix things, and I've been told, I'm not a technician. I know enough about it to fix some emergency, but it's all I can do to play the thing. There's some that can do damage to it in their repair. Isn't that true?
Well, yes, absolutely. It's really easy to do damage. I think that what showed me that first was when I brought home a pipe from the Allen Theater from the Austin. It was a string pipe, and it had a problem. And I showed it to my father. My father was an engineer. And I showed it to him, and he says, that can be fixed, that's soldered together. Well, I can solder that back up. And he took out his soldering gun.
Oh.
And touched it to the pipe, and the tip of the soldering gun went right through.
Sure.
Well, so we learned how easy it was to melt a pipe with something too hot.
What was, in your maintenance career, technical career, what was the biggest job you ever had? Without getting in the details of it, the biggest challenge you had with a pipe organ?
The biggest challenge, water. Repair of virtually anything that's been water damaged.
Okay. But what was the biggest instrument you've had anything to do with?
My first large instrument was Shea's Buffalo. That's 428 Wurlitzer. It was, at the time, it was installed in 1926. That was Wurlitzer's flagship. That was where they would take prospective customers. If they were a customer for a large organ for a large theater, they would be taken to Shea's Buffalo. And at a convention in 1964, when I first heard that organ, it was described to me as being 2 organs installed in 2 chambers a block apart. And that it sort of was, but it had a glorious sound. And many years later, basically in the starting about 1976 to the completion of the work we did on it in 1984, that was not only the largest organ I had worked on at that time, but it was an organ, it was a Wurlitzer that had been close to the Wurlitzer factory and had been worked on by Wurlitzer people. It had some damage done to it by, as you say, amateur technicians in the years in between. But I found that I could sit back and look at what was done there and see what the original intent was with the organ. And I probably learned more about what Wurlitzer had originally intended in their design, working on that organ, and not just jumping into it, but working on it at a real slow pace, in that I would sit and analyze what I was looking at first, and not try to outguess the factory. A lot of people get into trouble because they think, well, this was stupid, they shouldn't have done it this way, and that's, for the most part, yes, all the companies made mistakes, and they usually corrected them. So if you look at their later work, you find that out. You see the things that they did fix, but you're better off to just stick with what was done by the company in the first place.
Well, you're proclaimed, not self-proclaimed, but recognized as one of the experts in organ maintenance, restoration, preservation. You've done a lot in preparing documents about that for help. How, and we don't know who's going to be watching these videos, but somebody that's watching here that may have some inkling of being on the technical side because they don't want to learn how to play. How would you, what would you say to somebody that's maybe interested in getting on the maintenance side, restoration side? Just what advice would you give them?
Well, where I was fortunate was I really started early on. I actually built the pipe organ in my home, and I started that again when I was a junior in high school. And I learned a lot by just making mistakes. In fact, the first organ that I built was put together in my bedroom, and it was one keyboard, that was it. And it had 1.5 ranks of pipes, 1.5 sets of pipes. And I really only was learning at that point from reading a wonderful book on the subject by William H. Barnes, The Contemporary American Organ. And if you go to the library, you can find copies. There were many editions, so you can find copies of it from around 1929 that have a great deal of information on theater organs. And that was kind of what I did in the early years, and looked at lots of pictures, cross-sections of chests, and descriptions of how they worked. My first organ, I got very excited the first day I finally turned on the wind supply, which was a vacuum cleaner, and pressed the first key down, which was middle C, and it played. I was so excited. When I took my finger off the key, it didn't stop playing. I had discovered how to make a note play. I hadn't realized that there was a whole different mechanism involved in making it turn off.
Well, you had to build in sostenuto.
Yeah, right. So after playing about a dozen keys and discovering they all held on, that the only way to shut it off was to turn off the vacuum cleaner.
What would you do, though, to get somebody really excited into this?
Well, as I said, I was fortunate. With that little organ playing in my bedroom, and by the time this happened, this was towards by my senior year in high school, the principals of the Moelmann Skinner Company came down to Hartford, and they'd heard about this young kid who had built a pipe organ. They wanted to see it. I wasn't home, but my mother graciously took them up into my bedroom and showed them where the switch was, and they turned it on, and I apparently played on it, and we were all excited. And the next thing I knew, I had a job offer to work one summer for Moelmann Skinner as an assistant to installers. And that's probably where I learned or certainly early on, learned a great deal. So my recommendation is to try to find somebody in the business that knows what they're doing. There are a lot of people that maintain church organs. You can certainly learn how to tune and how to fix things. Don't really try to do it on your own. To try to find a mentor, somebody to assist you with.
Are there many books written on how to do what you do?
Not
or
really.
is it really,
Not.
is it people like you that have to train somebody else?
It's people like me that have to train somebody else. This is where some of what I did started to take a different turn. I worked for 15 years for the Austin Organ Company. Once they discovered that this organ nut that they wouldn't have anything to do with hiring was working for the rival organ company, I was then made an offer by the Austin Company to come to work for them. And actually the year before I graduated from Trinity College in Hartford, I went to work for Austin, and I stayed with them for an additional 15 years. I was with them for about 15 and a half years. And during that time, I was a design engineer. I designed organs and components of the organ and did a lot of research and development. But during that time, they decided that they needed a new shop superintendent, so they made me shop superintendent. But before they did so, I had to spend time in every one of the shops learning every one of the jobs. And that was one of the most valuable experiences I could have had. I made pipes, I voiced pipes, I worked on chests, made the components. And that was a great teaching experience for me.
You've probably done it all. Is that fair?
At least to some extent, yes, I have done it all, including casting pipe metal, actually making the metal. I had experience in all of those things.
Oh, I don't think we can ignore the fact that you've been on the Theater Organ Society, American Theater Organ Society Board of Directors numerous times, usually in the technical area, and brought a lot of credibility and help to the organization in making sure that organ maintenance is done professionally and in accordance with a manual or paper that you wrote on the preservation and conservation. And I think you're going to go down in history as being that interested to save these organs, even so far as creating this registry. Because you did that, didn't you?
Yes.
The registry. Today, we have, I believe, 66 organs in the registry.
And more to come.
More to come. As long as we have a registry, it recognizes those instruments and gives the people that play something to play that works.
True. I'd like to just back up a bit, because you were talking about writing some of this information down. And unfortunately, we all are born with talents. Many of us have a problem in that we never learned what our talent was that we were born with. But some of us have the opportunity to do that and to further our inborn talents further. I didn't know for quite some time that I had a talent for writing. And it's probably a different side of the brain from doing technical work. Most technicians are not comfortable with writing. It's not an easy thing to write down what you're doing. They want to do it, yes. They're the do-it people. Well, I had a little of both. Many technicians don't play at all. And so it's unusual. In my case, I started out with the interest in playing and wound up having to learn how to fix them in order to be able to have something to play on.
Is that a different side of the brain, do you think?
It's a different side of it's a different side of the brain, absolutely. So rather than getting a lot of one or a lot of the other, I probably got a little of both, and it's the person who can do everything but nothing well. I hope I don't fall into that category. I try not to, but it's a thing that I found easy to do, especially when I was in the Army. I discovered that one of my biggest talents was teaching, and I carried that when I came out. When I would do something, when I would work on something technically, fix something, repair something, I would take some photographs and write about it. And that really was the start. I think the first technical article that I did was one on how to re-leather a regulator.